Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber, and today's podcast host. Today we're going to be talking about an issue that many times goes under the radar. It's really important to how Michigan can clean up contaminated properties and brownfields across our cities and our state. A warm welcome to three great guests today. The Acting Economic Development Director for the City of Grand Rapids, and that's really one of Michigan's truly great cities, Jono Klooster. Also, we have Troy Cumings. He's a partner at Warner, Norcorss, and Judd. He's also the chair of the Michigan Chamber's Environmental and Energy Policy Committee. And Michigan Chamber's very own Mike Alaimo. He's the director of our Environmental and Energy Affairs. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Great to be here.
Well, environmental and energy topics are certainly front of mind for a lot of people, and they're always front of mind in the legislative process. And one of the items we've talked quite a bit about lately here in Lansing are updates to Michigan's Part 201 law, which is the environmental remediation under the Michigan Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Some would call that NEREPA. Mike, that is a lot of words and a big acronym. What does it mean?
Yep, that's right. It's a big word, big acronym for, a really critical program within our state for cleaning up legacy contamination, and more importantly, doing so in a way so that we can get our brownfield sites back to productive use. And the good, the bad, and the ugly of it is Chamber's been working on Part 201 issues certainly since I've been on board, but far beyond that as well. And have had really good discussions with the department about looking at some meaningful reforms that could make things better for the business community and regulated community in cleaning up contaminated sites. Unfortunately, we are seeing some legislation that would take this state back years or even decades with our environmental cleanup program. And so I think we're going to talk about both those things today.
Troy, what's a brownfield site? Why should people care?
Yeah, so brownfield site essentially is a contaminated site. And what that means under Michigan law, under Part 201, is that you're, quote-unquote, a facility. And there's 300 and some odd hazardous substances, and what Eagle has done is they've developed cleanup criteria for each of those. They're very conservative numbers, and if you have any of those substances above that number, that's when you become a facility, right? And you have to address it. And so when we say a brownfield site, that typically just means a site that has one of those hits right on it. It's used mostly in our urban centers, Detroit, Grand Rapids, other places.
Prevalent across the state, though?
Yep, it can be in rural areas. I mean, it's brownfield is really anywhere where there's contamination and somebody wants to redevelop it.
And so what we talk about today is how do we get it cleaned up, who pays for it, and how do we make sure that property gets back to useful life?
Exactly.
Right. Jono, the city of Grand Rapids, our second largest city here in the state, they have always so much going on. What a great city, and you're growing so much. How have the standards in Part 201 impacted development efforts in your community?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me today. Appreciate it, and appreciate you recognizing the momentum we have in Grand Rapids as well. I've been with the city for quite a while now, going on 13 years, I guess. And in that whole time, I have worked in the city's brownfield redevelopment program, which has been highly effective at moving us forward. So we're in a spot in Grand Rapids where we are growing. We have a demand for over 14,000 housing units, new housing units in Grand Rapids over the next couple of years. We have a lot going on our river, and there are many sites in Grand Rapids that are brownfields. I've worked on probably close to 100 brownfield projects in my time here at the city, and what we've been able to achieve is over $2 billion of private investment and 7,000 plus jobs, hundreds of millions of dollars of new taxable value added to the community, and thousands of new housing units. And so I think that all happens because there is predictability and accountability in redeveloping brownfield sites. So we work with developers of all different sorts, large, small, medium, new, legacy developers, and we work on properties that have all sorts of environmental issues on them. Some of them are really not that significant, and others have some challenges associated with them. But the ability to know your responsibilities in terms of assessing properties and what the obligations are that you have to undertake due care and make sure that the redevelopment's done in a way that protects the future users and make sure that it's a safe redevelopment is critical. Just that ability to understand those obligations, know what you need to do to assess the property and your responsibilities in the redevelopment and on an ongoing basis when you operate the property are very critical components to the work that we do.
And does your development community, most of them understand what their responsibility is and work closely with you? Do they do it on their own? How does this all come together? It seems to be different entities all working for the same goal.
Yeah, it's a great question. We have a good relationship with EGLE, Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. They're great supporters of the work we do and funders of the work that we do in Grand Rapids. Like I said, we work with a lot of different developers, but it's the environmental consulting community as well. We work closely with them. We provide a lot of funding for that assessment that happens in the community, and we, as part of the work that we do in brownfield redevelopment, we're making sure that all of that work is done comprehensively, because we obviously, as a community, we are not regulators, but we as a community want to make sure that redevelopment is done in a responsible way in Grand Rapids.
Absolutely. Mike, do we know as a state or in local communities, is there like a registry? Do we know where all these properties are? Does it come about where I buy property from you and then I have to maybe do some type of testing before I do my redevelopment and it gets discovered then?
Right. So certainly we have a number of sites throughout the state that are called orphan sites, where there isn't a liable party and they have been identified. Generally, how this works, is the developer or prospector comes in and purchases a parcel, and what they do at that point is baseline environmental assessment, and that is something that is information that they can provide to the department to talk about what they find in the ground, and then at that point can be discussion about any kind of plan around addressing what's found in the ground. But importantly, what we're talking about in terms of what we have today is a severe departure from what we had in pre-1995, where we were under what's called a strict liability regulatory system. And what that meant was if you went in and you purchased a site and you found any contamination in that site, you were liable for that contamination. So in other words, the law didn't really look at you any differently as the person that originally caused that contamination. So hugely problematic for any developer looking at these sites, because you're talking about thousands or even millions of dollars in difference around the cost of just getting that site to some kind of baseline where you're able to build on it.
Troy, from a legal standpoint, what are we looking at doing now, or what are the changes that they're talking about in the legislative process going forward?
Yeah, so there were, I think it's 7 bills. That were introduced right before the legislature broke, and they're voluminous, I would say, right? There's a lot in there, but a lot of I think what the intent is behind those bills is a lot of it is philosophical. I would say is that right now Part 201 allows for flexibility, right? And that's how CERCLA, that's how the federal government, EPA does it. That's how almost all states do, is that if you see a site, you see contamination, let's figure out what makes the most sense. Mm-hmm. And usually it's not feasible, totally cost prohibitive to just remove everything, right? It could be $1 billion at a big site to do something like that. It's not possible. And so Part 201 allows you to use institutional controls, natural attenuation, a lot of different things, right, that you can put into a work plan, combine together to do something that makes sense, that protects the public health safety, and it's not a continuing threat to the environment, and you can make really good use of that property going forward, right? And it makes sense. I think a lot of what these bills are trying to do is go back to like a pre-94 kind of position where you could only remove, right? That's the only thing you can do. Just take every atom of contamination out of the ground. Well, we know that doesn't work, right? That's why we created 201. That's why our cities weren't being redeveloped, right? And so they want to go back to that.
Well, to take it out, though, to what standard?
To
like
zero.
Perfection?
Yeah, perfection. Like you got to take everything out, right? To essentially, it's at least to below cleanup criteria, which is essentially, it's close to zero. And that's I understand the philosophical piece of that, but we just know from decades of experience that does not work, right? So I would say that's a really big piece of it, and some of the other things is expanding this concept of due care. And so under Part 201, you can buy a property, anybody can, and if you didn't cause contamination, it's contaminated. If you do a baseline environmental assessment, submit it to the Eagle, you're not liable. You don't have to clean it up, but you have what quote unquote due care. What that means is you got to just make sure that people that come onto your property are protected and you're not making anything worse, right? But a lot of what these bills are doing is expanding those concepts of a BEA and due care to get much closer to actually cleaning up property. Well, what that really does is it's a backdoor way to get to strict liability, right? So that now people that are innocent and purchase it to redevelop in the Detroit or Grand Rapids or something, one of the great project, now all of a sudden where they had just normal due care that you would have under in most states, now you have it's expanded, so you got to do a lot more. Well, then developers are like, I don't know if that's worth it then, right? Yeah. If it gets more strict, it's a lot more difficult to redevelop sites. So there's a lot more, right, in these. There's getting rid of statute limitations. It's reopening closed sites for basically any reason that Eagle wants. I mean, some pretty transformational changes to the program that we just know would be really detrimental. Are
these changes being driven more philosophically or ideology more so than sound science and data?
I think that's it depends who you ask, but we would say that most of that is philosophical and punitive, right? There's kind of this polluters are bad and let's go after these bad polluters. But the truth is, in Michigan, as we all know, we're a manufacturing state. We've been manufacturing for a long time. Yeah. And the vast majority of contamination in the state of Michigan right now was actually put there at a time when we didn't have environmental laws or it wasn't even illegal to do it, right? Well, we shouldn't be in a punitive stance at that point, right? Because at the time it was done, right, it was...
They weren't even regulated.
They weren't even regulations. So let's be practical, and that's what Part 201 is. How can we move forward with this? But these bills kind of go back to, no, I don't care. We're gonna go after polluters, right, and people we think that are causing this.
Jono, from your perspective, out in the city of Grand Rapids, what are some of the things that you think could be done to help clean up these sites and to make development a little easier, but still protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the public?
Yeah, it's a good question. I appreciate that. We're always thinking about ways that, everything we do, ways that we can make it more efficient and effective. I think the situation we're in right now, where there is that predictability, and as Troy mentioned, there are some options, right, where a developer can come in and assess a piece of property and understand what the issues are, and they may have one or two or three different sort of approaches to complying with their obligations under the current standard. That's really, from our perspective, that's an effective position to be in. I think we have run into, every once in a while, we run into situations where there's a little bit of vagueness or lack of clarity in sort of what the standards are that developers are required to comply with. And some of this might have to do with sort of emerging science or emerging contaminants. And I think when we can move more quickly towards a place of certainty, where developers, real estate investors can understand, even as we are learning, about these emerging contaminants, we can take a position of being sort of overly protective and deploy the resources that we have available to us, our brownfield redevelopment program, our grants and loan funding from Eagle, and make sure that we're redeveloping those properties instead of sitting around and kind of going back and forth about what's the appropriate way to approach this. I think taking a position of protective of human health and the environment and moving forward in that direction more quickly it would be helpful to us. But I also think, a lot of the programs that I just mentioned have been really effective, and these are programs, particularly the Brownfield Redevelopment Program, which I think Michigan, coming out of the history of the legislation that Troy was talking about, or Mike was talking about, that we developed the BEA program, and that led to the creation of the Brownfield Redevelopment Program, and that's been modified over the years, I think, from a position from the legislature, from EGLE, from our partners at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and now the State Housing Development Authority, with the support of our consulting community and legal community. I think we all view that as a very effective program and continue to find ways to make it more effective, to address the needs of communities, like the housing need we have in our communities. Amendments to the law last year really gave us some new tools there. So I think just continuing to focus on those programs that help get these properties that we want redeveloped, that do have environmental contamination, put back into productive use and adding value to our communities.
Yeah, exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head there. How do we add the value to the communities and solve a problem like affordable housing? Like I know a lot of people in your city are working towards. Mike, what's the economic impact of this regulation? Are we going far enough, fast enough? Is technology sometimes almost paralyzing us? Because as technology goes faster and faster, you can find more and more. And at some point, you still have to regulate and move forward. One term I've heard about recently is sacrifice zones. You can kind of explain that and how that impacts some of this.
Yeah, I mean, Troy originally pointed it out really well about, how this is that middle ground of providing practical solutions so that you're putting things back to productive use that, again, are deemed blighted or deemed contaminated now, but weren't necessarily considered that way historically. Michigan's a manufacturing state. We have a phenomenal manufacturing legacy. We're the state and city that put the world on wheels. But with that has come an environmental footprint that we're working to address. It doesn't mean that these are sacrifice zones. I would argue that protecting the public health while putting these sites back to productive use is the best way to utilize these sites and not sacrifice them. The technology is certainly been a part of understanding impacts to human health. That's not a bad thing on its face. But again, we need to make sure we have a regulatory system that works and strikes that balance between protecting the public health, but also allowing for a system that makes these sites not cost prohibitive to clean up and utilize.
Troy, you talked about we had a standard in place I think since like 1995. How strong is the impetus to change, and what should we be looking at? I know there's proposals out there. What's the outlook for these proposals? Because it sounds like could be a contentious political issue and philosophical. Maybe not R&D, but just where people come down on the regulatory framework.
Right. I would say there's not a huge desire to do this right now among the governor's office, House leadership, Senate leadership. Right? Like we have a few members that are really trying to push these, but how it goes in the legislature, right? And some issues that maybe don't have a lot of momentum can turn into having a lot of momentum, right, at some point, or part of a deal or something like that. Mm-hmm. Now, I think obviously with the House being split now, and it looks like maybe till mid-May, right, and then they're going to break for summer. Probably not a ton happening from now until the summer, but definitely lame duck 24, right? You would look at as a time when maybe something happens then. So we just want to have a continuing discussion on this and make sure that people are really educated on how good Part 201 has been, why it's good, and then why these bills, a lot of what these bills do would really take us back.
Yeah, I think key there is always just having transparency, letting the public know what we're talking about, what legislators are voting on, what governors or regulators are dealing with, and that way everybody can move forward together. Jono, in your role as the acting economic development director, how big of an issue is this when you're trying to either attract people within the state to relocate over to Grand Rapids or from other states?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about this issue, we certainly have to pay attention to what's going on in other states and putting ourselves, whether it's related to environmental policy or other economic development incentive programs and policies, we have to be aware of, the options that investors have to go to other communities and make sure that we're putting ourselves in a competitive position to compete for projects that are beneficial for our community. So that would absolutely be something that we'd want to take a look at, before taking a position one way or the other on anything that went before the legislature. In Grand Rapids, like going back to sort of my original comments, I think predictability is so important when people are looking at places to move, to make investments, to relocate their businesses, and to expand. Programs, regulations, very important. Anything that's going to be unpredictable or cost time is going to put us at a disadvantage for sure. So we try to work towards that as a local community and as a local government. Make sure that we do what we say, and we do it when we say we're going to do it, and to the extent that we can, encourage our partners at the state to take that position as well. That's where we're always landing.
Yeah, well, the development you've had there in Grand Rapids, you certainly developed a track record of doing just that, and I think that's why you're such an attractive location for many businesses and people to kind of put down their roots. Troy, what are we missing? What haven't we talked about that we should have mentioned here for our listeners?
Well, I think one of the things that maybe we haven't talked about that I talk about a lot when 201 comes up is there are solutions, right? And we've had very productive discussions with Eagle. There are some good things that we can do, right? What we do first is what is the actual problem? Can we agree what the problem is, right? And then what are some solutions that take into account impact or input from the environmental community, regulatory community, Eagle, and try to develop something that has broad-based support, right? Mm-hmm. We can do that, right? And we were kind of going that way, right? And have over the past few decades, and there's been times when that's been great. The legislation moving now was not a result of that kind of a process, right? But I'm really hopeful we can try to get back to that kind of a process, because I do believe that we can come up with some really good solutions. And when you get buy-in from different parties, right, and it's broad-based, more cleanups are going to happen, and that's the bottom line.
Mike, what's kind of the status of where things are, and how can people either get more information or get involved if they want to have a part of this discussion?
Yeah, so we do have the 6 or 7 bills that Troy mentioned have been introduced in both the Senate and the House. So we do expect hearings at some point in time in probably the first half of 2024, although, again, a little bit unclear with this legislative dynamic. So we're going to continue to voice our concerns on that and educate lawmakers on, to Troy's point, that we're not here just to say, no, don't do anything. There are constructive solutions that the Chamber is working on and willing to work with lawmakers and policymakers on. But I think, voicing the concerns about problems we have with the bills as introduced is going to be a key talking point. I think also talking to the state as we enter into the budget season about, where and when the state's willing to put more resources behind cleaning up these orphan sites where there is not a liable party, and we're doing what we can to protect our public health and natural resources. That should be a priority of this budget discussion going into next year. Good.
We're running out of time, so that's a good place to end it. And a very special thanks to Jono, Troy, and Mike, and to all of you for listening. It's important that we ensure our state is home to environmental cleanup standards that are working and that make Michigan competitive. Tune in to our next episode, subscribe or like our podcast for easy notifications, and until then, do whatever you can do to keep moving Michigan forward.